When neuroscientists perform brain scans on people who deal with very negative and dysfunctional thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, they often find physical causes. For example, there's a case study of a 9-year-old boy who attacked a little girl on the baseball field for no particular reason and was drawing pictures of himself hanging from a tree and shooting other children. A brain scan showed a cyst, the size of a golf ball, occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. When the cyst was removed, his behavior completely went back to normal, and he became a sweet, loving boy. Well, these types of findings confuse me. How do we know whether our thoughts, emotions, and behavior are actually a clear expression of our quality of consciousness and not just caused by constraints of the rule set? It seems possible that a person who exhibits horrible behavior might actually be a very evolved consciousness dealing with brain damage or some other physical issue. Shouldn't each player receive clear and accurate feedback on the quality of his consciousness in order to have an effective learning experience? The fact that the state of a person's physical body has such a great impact on the way they feel and the type of behavior they exhibit makes it very unclear whether it has anything to say at all about the quality of their consciousness.
Well, the consciousness itself is not necessarily terribly confused, at least not at the IUOC level anyway, because yes, the body, let's say, has that cyst in it, and because it has that cyst in it, that puts constraints on what the conscious can do. So that little boy, because of that cyst, can't feel happy and cheerful and and caring for other people, because the part of him that supports that, the part of his biology, the part of the rule set that supports that ability is damaged or missing or somehow stopped by that cyst. So now the consciousness doesn't mean the consciousness gets mean and wants to hang people. It just means that the consciousness loses control of that avatar to a certain degree. That avatar kind of goes off, is less in their control than it was before. For instance, another thing that's maybe even more obvious is if you have brain damage, you get in an accident, and you get hit in the head, and you have brain damage, and now you maybe don't have very good memory. Maybe you don't have any memory of things past. Maybe you have a speech impediment. Maybe you can't hear in one ear. You get all kinds of things because of that brain damage. And now your consciousness doesn't suddenly, lose something. It's just that it has to play an avatar that can't do certain things, can't think certain ways, can't access its memory. And it has to play that avatar that way. Now, from the free will awareness unit's viewpoint, it just suddenly can't function the way it used to. So your IUOC has kind of a bigger picture. It's kind of the larger picture of this. But basically, what our local consciousness is a free will awareness unit. And the free will awareness unit pretty much thinks it is the avatar because it's only experienced the avatar's experiences. So now suddenly, when it has this change in its biology with a cyst or a damage from an accident or whatever, now that free will awareness unit is still feeling like, go smile and be happy and, give that little, girl a kiss. But the avatar won't do that because the avatar can't do that because the biology blocks that. The avatar can't express that. So the consciousness doesn't know really, the free will awareness unit probably doesn't know what's going on at that point. It just has to deal with it. Well, there's lots of ways you can deal with things. And these things will present very challenging things to the free will awareness unit. It may not make the challenge, or it might. It could come to the conclusion of things aren't working the way they used to. So let me back off for a minute and find out why. Maybe I should go tell my parents that, something's wrong and I don't see things anymore. I get angry all the time, and they can take me to a doctor and maybe get my cyst removed. That might be a choice if you were aware enough. But if you're too young to be that aware, then that's hard to do. Your free will awareness unit just has to deal with it. So those things don't happen except in the margins, right? There's only one out of, probably 500,000 children that get a cyst there that causes that problem. Maybe only 1 in 5 million children. So these little things do happen, and the system basically just lets them run out however they run out. And yes, the free will awareness unit now is suboptimal. It can't necessarily learn the kind of things it would have learned, but it has other choices to make. Maybe it needs to learn better how to control that angry behavior. It may need to realize that angry behavior is not the way it wants to act, and it's not going to do that way, and it has to develop control. You see, it's hard to say. So some free will awareness units would gain from it, perhaps. They'd learn a lot of self-control in that, where others wouldn't be able to do self-control because they just aren't that grown up yet. And they would then just, act badly, yes, but not because the consciousness has turned evil. It's just that the conscious now has an avatar that bites people and slaps people and gets angry for its own reasons, you might say. So that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, no doubt the free will awareness unit is now off course, but it still has choices. The choices now are maybe harder. In some cases, let's say they're too hard, like this young boy. He was too young to maybe look back and see the bigger picture and start to develop something else. Where if it happened to him when he was 18, he would have been old enough to back up and say, there's something wrong here. I need some help. I need to just not act that way, though that's the way I feel, and start working on, a plan B. So sometimes it's just that way. Sometimes a free will awareness unit just has a bad incarnation. Doesn't ruin it forever. That's just one incarnation. And it's not the consciousness that's turned evil that's going to make it de-evolve. It's just the avatar is hard to control. The avatar is kind of out of control and is not responsive. So it has to go through dealing the best it can with that. And it may be an unpleasant thing, but it's not really hurting the consciousness so much. You can think of that. Let's say you got an elf, and your elf was brain damaged somehow. Somehow the code that coded that elf, made them do things, and it was constantly being aggressive when you didn't want it to be aggressive. You just say, well, let's go up and ask these people directions of where to go. And your elf goes up and pulls out its sword and kills them all. And you're, oh man, I didn't learn anything. I didn't get my directions. Don't do that. And so you tell it next time, you say, put your sword down while it goes up and talks to people. You learn how to deal with it, right? You try to find a workaround. And that's what the free will awareness unit has to do. It has to find a workaround. So you may just have to finish your game with that defective elf. So you get a new game where you get a different elf. You say, well, good riddance for that elf. That wasn't any fun. Well, that's just one game out of thousands. So it doesn't really ruin your life or, make you de-evolve or anything. It just gives you a really hard time where you don't learn the things maybe you'd hoped that you would have learned, but you learn a few other things trying to deal with a cranky avatar. Actually, it's not cranky. It just has lost some of its functionality. So that's kind of the way it goes. So the incarnation is not always optimal. Sometimes incarnations just go tough. They just get really difficult, and you have to deal with horrendous things like what was the Reeves, Superman actor, falls off a horse and is paralyzed. He's quadriplegic, can't do anything but move his eyes and maybe his face. That's all he does. Well, that wasn't in his plan, no doubt. That just happened. It's one of those accidents, and then he had to deal with it. So he could deal with it well, or he could deal with it poorly, but he can still, he still has to deal with it.
So I guess it's not necessarily true that, say, if someone has psychological issues or emotional issues or behavioral issues, it's not necessarily true that working on his quality of consciousness is going to solve everything. It might just be purely a physical problem. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. It may be that way. It may be a physical problem. You know, the central nervous system is a hugely complex biological machine, if you will, and it can get quirky. It's, you know, and you just have to work with those quirks. So, yes, it may be that people who are depressed, let's say, they may just have a brain chemistry that does not produce enough neurotransmitters. And when you don't produce enough neurotransmitters, you get depressed. You get cranky. That's one of the symptoms of it. And it may not have anything to do with their quality of consciousness. It may just be an expression of their biology. Absolutely. On the other hand, if your consciousness is having trouble and your consciousness gets depressed just because it's full of fear, okay, now that consciousness being full of fear may decrease the number of neurotransmitters in your body because the mind leads, the body follows, you see. Now you can improve your quality of consciousness and the depression problem just goes away. So it can happen either way. Yes, people who do awful things like this child, you know, gets mean and ugly doesn't mean that he's got a mean and ugly consciousness or that he's got a low quality of consciousness. It could be physical. It's this interplay of both things. The consciousness and the avatar have a lot of interplay. And that's one of the advantages of the system because there's such a rich set of experiences that are possible. If the avatar never could be quirky, then there's a lot of experiences that would never take place. So the fact that it's this interaction with a lot of uncertainty in the interaction is a feature, not really a problem. It sounds like it can be a problem for individuals sometimes, but it also gives us uh, things to deal with, problems to solve, choices to make. You know, because some of them are positive too. You may be born with exceptionally long fingers, which makes you a really good piano player because you can stretch them out and hit those keys where somebody that got stubby little short fingers and they took lessons and lessons and lessons and they just never get very good because they keep hitting two keys at once. Maybe they got short, fat fingers, makes it even worse. So there's an advantage, you see, but then somebody with short, fat fingers may have an advantage doing something else, you know, that they get better at because they have real strong fingers. And maybe they're better at shoeing horses or who knows what, you know, taking lids off that are stuck on bottles, you know, it's hard to say, but there may be an advantage for things and, you know, and disadvantages for things as well. So that's life. It gives you another set of choices. So it puts some randomness in the way of your consciousness to have to deal with it.
I see. Yeah. Well, because neuroscientists these days are very materialistic, so any sort of psychological issue that someone may be dealing with, they tend to just blame it all on the brain. You know,
Yes.
they say it's because the brain is this way or that way.
Right.
So I guess there is a truth to that, but
Yes. Sometimes they're right.
I see.
Yeah. Sometimes they're right. It is the brain that's doing that, and sometimes they can fix it, and other times they're wrong. And they give medicines, they do this, they do that, they do everything they can, and it doesn't make any difference because that's really not the problem. Or they just don't know enough about the brain yet. Or they can only ease symptoms, like talk about the lack of neurotransmitters. Okay, so they can give them you know, Prozac, which will increase the number of neurotransmitters, increases the serotonin that produces the neurotransmitters. Well, that gives that person symptomatic relief. You see, as long as they take that, now they have symptomatic relief. They're not as depressed as they were anymore. Medicine works, but it's just a symptom reliever. It doesn't fix the problem. Let's say the problem was a low quality of consciousness that has a lot of fear. Okay, that's the problem. So now this person doesn't get off of the medicine. If they do, the depression comes right back. You see, so there are ways of of fixing symptoms that don't fix problems. So medicine tends to do a lot of that if it's psychological. They can still change symptoms, but they don't fix the problem. And that's often a difficulty because medicines also have, um, you know, downsides. There's always a long list of negative things that come along with taking almost any medicine. So if you take a medicine that's just removing a symptom and it gives you another symptom, you have to be careful you're not trading, you know, a lesser symptom for a bigger symptom.